Would the government say something about Dr. Pierre Chan's letter? There's a table. Would you please respond to his question? And we're not going to deal with this today. Ms. Alice Mack, first round. I have a simple question. Actually, I've asked the question previously, but now since we have someone from the HA, I would like to get an answer from them. For these doctors with limited registration that you have hired, are they all doing clinical duties? And that is, they are not doing administrative work in an office. In other words, that they will be helping frontline doctors and share their workload and lessen their workload. Ultimately, we would like to make sure that patients will get quality medical and healthcare services. I would like the HA representative to assure us that all these doctors are hired for clinical services. And some people said that it's not that that HA did not have sufficient doctors. It's just that HA will not hire more because some private doctors in private practice want to serve in the HA, and you won't hire them. And some said that the doctors with limited registrations, there are many applicants, but the HA only accepted a few, so they just put up this as an excuse. HA doesn't really want to hire more. Dr. Jiang, we hire doctors with limited registration to help frontline doctors and to lessen their workload. We want to make sure that they are of a sufficiently high quality and they can assume the duties in these posts. 100% of the work that they carry out is clinical services. They have to be. They will do on-call duties. They will have to work in shifts, and they just like other frontline doctors. And there's no administrative duty for them. As long as doctors are suitable and appropriate, we hire them, whether full-time or part-time. Whether they graduate from Hong Kong U, CUHK, or have passed licentiate examination, or whether they were previously working as a doctor with us and now they want to return. As long as the specialties are compatible and they are willing, we will hire as many of them. But some of them would like to work in a certain location, and they may not want to work in some others, and then we would, as far as possible, persuade them to take up part-time post. Dr. Jiang, can you assure us further that doctors with limited registrations that you have hired would not affect the promotion prospects of local doctors? Would they take up a promotion post and affect promotion of local doctors? All these doctors are residents, so-called residents. All these posts are additional posts. And that's why the vacancies will not be affected. We would recruit all suitable locally registered doctors. And for medical graduates, after they have been they passed through the houseman stage, they will all be hired. And these doctors with limited registration will not stand in the way of local doctors' promotion. I would like to put on record, because in the community there are some half-truths and rumors that you are hiring doctors with inferior qualifications, or those coming from trained in the mainland, and that is there's a hidden agenda in hiring doctors with limited registration. Could you please clarify this point?
Of course, the requirement of the quality of doctors is of paramount importance, so as to protect the patients in the public sector. And that is why, for the 3 requirements, one of which is that there should be 3 years working experience or clinical experience in hospitals, and the second requirement is that the qualification should be comparable to the intermediate examination of the HKAM, and this is a quality assurance requirement. We are not placing focus on where the student has graduated, but of course the relevant requirements should be met, among which the most important one is that the qualification should be comparable to the intermediate examination of the HKAM. Third round, Dr. Pierre Chan. Chairman. Now about this amendment bill, whenever we amend the medical registration ordinance, we look keenly forward to it, because amendment doesn't come in a decade's time. It is a good opportunity for us to address the issues close to the heart of the public. Of course, the administration would like to see the passage of the bill. We, however, would like to clarify some points first. I have some questions, Chairman. It seems that, according to the administration, there are 3 major reasons for tabling the bill in 2016 and in 2017. One point is about the long waiting time for disciplinary hearings, and we agree with that. The second aspect is about lay membership, and the third aspect is about limited registration. We have been spending much time on limited registration, and we have been asking a lot of questions. Our members are quite concerned about limited registration, and the proposal is to extend the period from 1 to 3 years. Now, I'd like to move a motion, Chairman. Just a very modest request. I'd like to move a motion in relation to the terms of the limited registration. What should be the appropriate juncture? Can I move it now, or should we wait for a quorum, Chairman? Now, we're in the process of examining the bill. I don't know what your motion is about, but usually, if you want to move an amendment to the bill, it will be done by way of CSA. But if you are thinking of moving a motion which is not binding, you don't really need to move a motion. You can just tell the administration. If you believe that a certain thing is a flaw, and whether or not the administration would like to address the gray area or the loophole is another matter. You can discuss with the administration. I don't see the rationale of moving a motion without notice, which is not binding. It is not, well, just like what happened yesterday, at the Finance Committee, members moved motions without notice under Para 37A, and then no discussion was ensued. So I don't know how you're going to approach the issue. I believe that after the summer break, we will come back and continue to examine the bill, and then proceed with CSAs, etc. I do hope that during the summer break we can discuss with the administration. I am sincere about it, and we have members here today, and quite a number of members have commented on limited registration, and I'd like to move a motion. I want to know whether a quorum is necessary. I have prepared the motion. Let me read it out and see if you agree. I'm not talking about amending the law because we have not reached the stage of CSAs. Now, in relation to the limited registration for sections 14A of the MRO, the administration should review the powers delegated to the authority in granting limited registration. Because, as mentioned just now, there are circumstances that these requirements can be circumvented. So during the summer recess, if we could put our heads together, I think that it would be good because we still have time. I'm discussing with Madam Clerk if you wish to move a motion. First of all, it should be relevant to the bill in question, and we'll need to vote on the motion. The quorum is 11 members. We need to have at least a quorum here. You told me about the motion now. I need to read it, however, to see whether it is related to the issue being discussed today. If it is relevant, we can proceed with your motion. But there is another question of whether a sufficient number of members would come back. Well, I asked for a quorum count. I counted, and we did have a quorum. Right, but members have been going in and out of the room. So why don't you just table the motion? Let me read through it and see if we can do it. I want to ask for a quorum count. No, you don't need to do that. I need to do two things first. I need to see whether it is there is any substance. If I ring the quorum bell, we'll be wasting 15 minutes. I don't think that the members would agree to such a waste of time. So please go on and tell us what you want to say, because today we should focus on issues. Since we have representatives from the Medical Council and the HA and the Chinese University of Hong Kong as well, and they have come on your request. So we should focus on this issue because they will not come at the next meeting. I haven't read your motion. I don't know whether the motion is related to what we have been discussing. Yes. So I think we should finish the discussion and let other members ask all questions related to the paper before we proceed with your motion. I don't know whether this is a better approach. I don't know whether there are other questions from members. Well, if members say that we have finished all the questions about this paper, we can then move on to something else. And Mem Clark, meanwhile, will page members to see if they'll come back. Do you have other follow-up questions? But can I ask for a quorum count? You request a quorum count. All right, 15 minutes. Right, because with great sincerity, I'd like to know more about limited registration. And let me explain, I'm not wasting time. For limited registration, I've heard a lot of concerns. But my take is that whether it's a period of 1 or 3 years, I was just trying to make a point. Trying to explain. The quorum bell is now being rung. We should wait for the bell to finish first. I want you to comment on because I was asking the clerk to page members to come back. So you asked for a quorum call. We should wait.
我盡快影印俾你，而家都未夠人。
We still haven't got a quorum. I'll try to give out photocopies as soon as possible. I'll read it out. Just now, some members weren't here. And then Dr. Pierre Chan said he would like to move a motion. So together with the legal advisor and the secretariat, we read through his motion and considered the relevance with today's issue. He said that instead of a CSA, he would like to move a motion, and then he also asked for a quorum call. And that is why we're ringing the quorum bell. When we form a quorum, namely 11 members, and now we have 9 members, excluding him. He is not in the room, but we are used to this practice of members calling for quorum count and then leaving the room. The motion is that in relation to limited registration under Medical Registration Ordinance Section 14A, the government should give power to the Medical Council of Hong Kong to decide on the conditions C and D and then to amend the law. This is not a CSA. I don't know how the President would rule on this motion. What happens if this is done by way of CSA instead? We're discussing Section 14A of the MRO to extend the registration period from 1 to 3 years. As for BCD, we have lawyers assisting us in relation to the long title. To extend the period from 1 to 3 years is a bit marginal, but I won't say whether this is irrelevant. I will let members decide whether we deal with the motion or not. If members believe that we should not deal with it, then so be it, and vice versa. If members believe that we should deal with the motion, we can then vote on it to see if the motion will be carried. I think the photocopies are ready. I'll distribute to members as soon as possible. Mr. Paul Chair, whilst we're waiting, perhaps we can discuss the following. It's a motion. It's not a CSA, like Chairman said, and this is not a panel to discuss policy issues. So what's the purpose of this motion? I've referred to the ROP for motion moved without notice. During the scrutiny of the bill, a motion can be moved, and it's up to me to rule whether the motion is directly related to the item on the agenda. I won't say it is irrelevant at all, because the long title also includes extending the registration period. He has worded it in the way of a BCD, and I would now, well, we have a quorum, right? We have 11 members already. So let's stop the quorum bell and vote on whether we should deal with the motion. So for members in favor of Dr. Pierre Chan's motion, in favor of dealing with Dr. Pierre Chan's motion, would you please raise your hands? Chairman, the mover wasn't here just now, but he's just returned. Please ask Dr. Chan to explain his motion before we vote on it. I think that is written very clearly. Is there any part of his motion that you don't understand? I don't quite understand. So perhaps Dr. Chan can explain the rationale of moving motion. So Dr. Chan, please spend a minute or two to explain your motion. I'm not going to rule on it because just now you were not here. I am letting members decide whether to deal with your motion. All right, understood. Now, I urge members to support this motion, which is now being discussed, and I am coming to my point in a moment. There is one kind of registration that is full registration for doctors, 5 years of medical training, and also pass of the licentiate examination and 1 year of practice. However, for limited registration, the problem is that for the 2 universities there is a loophole.
希望係可以
I can see that the ordinance allows this, and so as I pointed you to, that is page 2 of the paper, paragraph 5. It says that actually a few doctors are no longer registered in an overseas jurisdiction, so it doesn't comply with 14A of MRO. But still, these doctors can still practice with limited registration in Hong Kong. I see this as a small loophole. Since we have this bill, I'd like to use this opportunity to think about how we can plug this small loophole, or let us use the word optimize, how we can optimize this matter to give more confidence to the public. I will explain that actually limited registration has been effective through these years, but I will explain my case. Even if it has been effective, there is a minority of cases which is not in line with the framework of the law, and yet the MCHK is given the power to circumvent this. Well, I gave you 2 minutes and it has been exceeded. Only you yourself have been asking this question. I haven't heard other members say anything about this. Other members were talking about 1 year or 3 years, and actually the bill is about 1 year and 3 years and the pros and cons of the different periods. And yet, members are not talking about BCD under 14A. Members did not question the authority given to the MCHK. This is not even in the long title of the bill. But anyway, I don't want to waste time on it. According to procedures for Bills Committee, this is the manual for chairman of committees. According to 439B, I have to make a ruling whether the motion is directly related to the matter under discussion, and I would ask members to consider whether we should process the motion. I dare not say it is not directly related because it mentions Section 14A. I will leave it to members. We have a quorum. So members who are present, if you agree, we will process the motion and we will put it to the vote. But as to whether we should process it, now I would ask members, those in favor of processing the motion, hands up. 5. Those against processing the motion, hands up. 7. The motion will not be processed. Sorry, I did not ask you because we have already finished the quorum count. Mr. Holden Chow, is it that you wanted to raise your hand to speak on the motion? I don't need the floor anymore. Chairman, I'd just like to say one thing. Sorry. Look, we are not going to process the motion. But since you haven't spoken, if you are not going to speak on the motion because the motion is not going to be processed, but if you want to ask a question, you can have your first round. But I'm saying, since we have the chairman of the MCHK, the CUHK, and the HA here, let us please ask questions on the paper. Okay, thank you. Dr. Chan, you want to continue with your questions? I'd like to explain to members. I'd like to say this about limited registration. The HA, the 2 universities, engage doctors with limited registration to help us. this is being done. Chairman, how many minutes do I have? 5 minutes, but I'm not very strict today. From the data, we know that the licentiate examination is to ensure basic safety. I do agree with Professor Lau, the chairman of the MCHK. Say, if you ask me to sit for Chinese, English, and mathematics examination at DSE, if you ask me to get a pass, I am confident. And if you ask my doctor classmates, and as Professor Lau was saying, if you ask me to sit the first part multiple choice, we are confident because we are talking about basic orthopedics. And say, for example, we should be able to read an X-ray film to see whether there is bone fracture. This is what we usually do. This is basic knowledge, and we are confident that we can get a pass. Now, why is it that the passing rate of the licentiate examination is low? I can give you the data later. The government data is that over half or even 70 to 80% are mainland doctors, and their passing rate is low. We like those. We will want to embrace those who pass, but those who come from Western countries have a high passing rate. And if you do your multiplication, automatically you will see that the passing rate is at a certain level. As for the monitoring systems, I understand it is different between the HA and the universities. And even if we have so stringent monitoring, we can still see that there are cases where doctors don't have registration in their place of origin. This is in the government paper, and that is why the monitoring system is problematic, and I'd like to see whether we have the chance to deal with this. And I'll start with my questions. My second question had to do with items A to E for limited registration, which is under Section 14A of Cap 161. These are statutory requirements for doctors with limited registration. As I said, some people don't comply with these requirements, and we exercised discretion. And this is done by the MCHK. Now, can I ask you to turn to page 4 of the paper. Now, what is the problem? On top of the basic statutory requirements, the HA adds 3 more requirements, and these are 11A, B, and C. There are 100 people with limited registration. Only 10 odd work at the HA. Now, actually, we want people to help with pediatrics, A&E, and surgical wards at the HA, but only 10% or so work there. Over 80% work in universities where the requirements are not that high. I need to make a point here. This is what is strange about limited registration. We need people to work at the HA, but on top of the statutory requirements, the HA adds 3 more requirements. And in the process, it is said that in the last 5 years, 300 odd people were kept out. The HA says it needs 300 people, but since it adds more requirements, and over 300 people came, but then they were all regarded as failing the test. So they only have 10%. But the 2 universities are more relaxed in their standards, and there are also exemptions. Therefore, you can see a mismatch. We need people. And even the CE or the SFH would like to have people helping certain departments in the HA. So in my list of questions submitted, if you look at Appendix C, you gave me some figures, all right. You told us how many complied with your 3 extra requirements. I'd like to ask whether HA and the 2 universities use the same standards, but I don't think so. That is why in Appendix C or the table there, I'd like you to compare the standards between the 2. I'd like to explain why I'm asking these questions. Because as I said, doctors with limited registration should be helping out departments in the HA where there is an urgent need, like the medical departments, the A&E departments. There are not enough beds, not enough doctors. But the actual data we are seeing shows that actually the extra doctors are not working at A&E or medical wards. I like to see, well, whether it is legislative or not, it doesn't matter. But in the process, how can we help the situation? Supposing it's 3 years, and then they would come to choose the less demanding jobs, then they are not really helping us. So can I ask the administration whether you can give us more data? Are you supporting opening the doors wide so you can allow as many people in the medical field to come, as many as possible? But I heard from the team that HA doctors have to sit the intermediate examination. But for universities, they engage people for research. They have different standards. Chairman, let me give you some information. This is not what we heard. I heard Professor Lau say they need people who will be able to do state-of-the-art research, and they are also serving private patients. Well, I support that. I like to be able to engage professors of who are world-renowned to come to Hong Kong. We need them. I'm not objecting to that at all. But there is a long spectrum. We have 80% working in universities. Some of them have state-of-the-art skills, but some can't even comply with the HA requirements. Some can't even comply with the statutory requirements. So please refer to Part C of my list of questions. How can we make sure we are getting the people we need? Whether you want to open the door, I don't understand your question. You seem to be criticizing the universities that they impose relaxed standards, and you are also saying the HA can't get enough people because the extra requirements are too stringent. They have not been able to recruit the 300 doctors they want. So what is your view? No, I want to seek some understanding into the situation because I want to help. There is not a balance. In reality, there are only 10-odd doctors with limited registration working at the HA. No, I am not trying to block you, but just now you were not here. I heard you say that even if it is 1 year, they are allowing those doctors to stay for 3 years. Even if you don't do clinical work, they can do research and they can teach. That is why they don't need to sit the intermediate exam because they don't see patients. However, HA applies more stringent standards. You seem to be criticizing the HA for not recruiting enough people, and you say it is unfair for the universities to be able to engage more people with lower standards. Sorry. Let me say it again. I have worked in university hospitals. I have been in touch with different doctors, and now I work at the front line. Some doctors with limited registration at the universities also do clinical work. through the teaching universities, they are in touch with locals. They teach there and they also do clinical work. This is a fact, and the law allows it. The professor says some doctors may go even to the Hong Kong sanatorium to see patients. It's a private hospital. It happens, and it is allowed by the law. Local doctors can't do that. They have a bigger scope of operation than local doctors. But it's all right. Under the law, there are basic requirements for limited registration. That is 14A, Cap 161. There are 5 conditions. You have clinical experience and you're a registered doctor and you can apply. But what is the mismatch? The HA needs people, but it imposes extra requirements. First, my question is for the HA. You have screened out over 300 people. If you had not imposed extra requirements, would you have had more people working in the disciplines you desire? Secondly, is it that the majority working at universities may not be able to comply with the extra requirements of the HA? I'm asking the question so that, well, you are repeating yourself. We understand you. Dr. Zhang should answer. But you have been mentioning the 300 odd doctors. You know and I know that actually it is not 300 for last year or the year before last. It is the time when the scheme was first launched. Now there is a shortage of 300 doctors. Why nobody is coming along, Dr. Zhang? Well, basically, we have different objectives. At the HA, we need to recruit quality doctors who would provide clinical service at the front line. This is our objective. We don't just want any doctor, because from our communication with the front line, if you recruit inexperienced doctors, we cannot be helped because these doctors will have to be trained and they need a lot of supervision, so they cannot help us. After screening, those who are screened in should be able to help the frontline workers. But universities have a different objective. We must ask all doctors to comply with the limited registration requirements plus the HA requirements. Actually, last time a member asked Chairman, I don't request the HA to come every time, but since Dr. Zhang is here, I will try to ask all questions relating to the HA. Last time, a member asked about the 3 extra requirements. I agree, because you want to enhance the safety to benefit the public. I'm reassured by you, Dr. Zhang. But last time, a member asked that the extra requirements are quite stringent, and in the process, in a matter of 5 years, about 400 who can comply with the basic requirements, but they have been screened out by your extra requirements, and in the end you have only got a dozen or so. I share the view of the HA. Okay, you want them to sit the intermediate examination and you have a language requirement. I agree. I'd like to know, if we relax it to 2 years or 3 years, will it help the HA to be able to screen in more amongst the applicants? Can you be helped? Well, that question has been asked, and the HA answered it. They say they don't have the data, but They said that if it is extended to 3 years, definitely more people will be attracted to come. The CU also said the same thing.
I don't have any comment on the period of limited registration. You said if it's 3 years, instead of 2 years. I'm talking about HA's additional requirements, 3 years of experience in hospitals. I'm not talking about the period of limited registration. I'm talking about one of the additional requirements of HA. You're talking about the 3 years working experience in a foreign hospital. And if it's 2 years, how many people would come? And if not, please start to collect the statistics. The most important thing is to help the frontline staff. If you want to acquire an intermediate qualification, you have 3 years of working experience anyway. If they have 3 years of clinical experience, then we are sure that this is an experienced doctor, not just a qualified doctor, an experienced doctor. Under the current intermediate examination system is different. This is a technical issue. We are talking about 14A, the registration period to be extended from 1 year to 3 years. And we're not talking about other conditions or requirements. If we say there will be 20 or 30 more doctors, but Professor Lau would say that we need to maintain the minimal safety standard. And even if an answer is provided to, if the answer is provided by the HA, it doesn't mean that the medical council would approve it. Most doctors can pass the intermediate examination without the need to have worked 3 years. I understand your professional expertise. We're not talking about the additional requirements. Can you consider doing something about these requirements to attract more doctors? Then that's why I asked you what ideas you've got, so that we can, if we have a shortage of doctors in the medicine specialty, we relax it for that particular specialty, and then we can introduce a large number of doctors. Is that what you want? I don't understand the questions raised by our doctor colleagues, but I would like to seek some information from Dr. Jiang of HA. 14A is simple. You just want to extend the registration period to 3 years. I think Dr. Chen is concerned about 2A, B, C, D, E, the requirements. On the one hand, we open the gate wide, but in practice, we are still limiting entrance. And even if you allowed the registration period to 3 years, subsection 2BC may not be satisfied by some overseas doctors. But it's just talking about acceptable overseas qualification, adequate and relevant full-time post-qualification clinical experience. In paragraph 4, the government's paper, it's actually the contents of section 14A of the ordinance. I think in the paragraph 11 of the same paper, and that is for HA to accept non-locally trained doctors. HA will only employ doctors who possess all of the following requirements. And then we have ABC, whether you have an qualification comparable to the intermediate examination, do you have 3 years working experience in hospitals, and are you able to speak fluent English and Cantonese? So they are very concerned that under 14A it seems harmless. If we change the period of registration from 1 year to 3 years, that seems harmless. But now HA, on top of the law, would also impose some restrictions on yourself. Although the ordinance doesn't say anything about 3 years of experience and qualification equivalent to intermediate examination, then the extension of registration period is not meaningful, because HA will not relax the restriction in respect of the requirements on top of the ordinance. So it seems that paragraph 4 and paragraph 11 are not compatible to each other. That's my understanding. Perhaps you can clarify things. I know, I understand the questions. Why do we want to accept doctors with limited registration to work, to join the HA? We want to get helping hands. So we have these 3 requirements. We think that if they fulfill all the requirements, 3 requirements, they will be helpful. If not, they will not less helpful. It's about the needs of our work. It's not really about the conditions for limited registration. We're saying that extending the limited registration period to 3 years would attract more doctors, and that would help us alleviate the shortage problem. But so we can do this in the review. Let's look at the table. In 2015, 2016, you have accepted 40 applications, you rejected 35. So it's a 2.5%, 12.5%. It's 5 over 40. We are told that if we extend the registration period to 3 years, we can attract more doctors. So you're talking about people who would have satisfied the conditions, and they are not attracted because there's no certainty. Then they will have to pack their things when 11 months has passed. So this is helpful. So it seems that it's not a problem of 3 years or 1 year, but the additional 3 requirements. If it is an expect, you want the doctor to speak fluent English and Cantonese. It's difficult. It's just impossible to comply with. So are you imposing some restriction on yourself? Can you do away with the constraints? And if they pass the examination, then that can be. Then if that's the case, the Doctors Sans Frontier will not be able to provide service in Africa, and the doctors cannot speak African languages. So I have a problem with paragraph 11 bracket C. Mainland doctors may be good doctors, but they cannot speak fluent English. We need doctors. We don't need orators to offer medical treatment. It boils down to the question of work requirements. We're not saying that as long as we have a doctor who can practice in Hong Kong, as approved by the medical council, we'll hire him. That's not the premise. We want the doctor to be able to help our frontline doctors. Cantonese is important, but not all specialties require this. We say that anesthesia, pathology, and radiology are the exceptions because they don't have such a big need to directly communicate with the patient. But if it's an A&E or outpatient service, if the doctor cannot speak Cantonese, he is not able to help frontline doctors. Instead, he may be causing the slippage of the work. So we're not talking about whether the doctor fulfills the minimum registration. We are talking about whether the doctor we hire would be able to help our frontline doctors. That's why we have asked for these three factors. We want these doctors to be able to help our doctors at the front line instead of causing more problems. And then other doctors will help these doctors to practice medicine. It's not about a question about the minimum requirements. I want to seek a quick solution. There are no problem with Section 14A bracket 3, but I also understand Dr. Pierre Chan's concerns. But as I've heard Dr. Chan's explanation, the extension of the registration period to 3 years may not be able to help with the recruitment of overseas doctors. Well, sometimes the patient is unconscious or maybe not be answered questions during the resuscitation. So I don't accept the assertion that without the ability to communicate, there is no way you can provide the service. That's in relation to 11C. Even if you insist on doing this, and even if I give you another 70 years, you'll not be able to get enough doctors because they can't speak the language. Many members have expressed different views on the same point. Some would say that I don't object to the extension to 3 years, but it's useless, so let's not do it. But you are saying that, well, you may extend it to 3 years, but if you don't solve these are the problems, it's useless. But for the HA, they have been doing this for long. They want the doctor, upon assuming duty, will be able to work like the doctors trained under the 2 local medical faculties. They can do the job 100% and not at a discount. And not everyone is working at the A&E department, and not all patients are unconscious. So there are different opinions expressed by you, by Dr. Pierre Chan, and by other members. And you are saying that extending the registration period to 3 years is useless because of the other constraints. And Dr. Chan is saying that you might as well not do it. And you are suggesting that you must amend some other conditions to tie in. But according to the HA, if you allow the registration period to 3 years, and the CUHK share this view, if you offer them a year's contract, it's more difficult to attract doctors, and some of them are here for the short term. But if you offer them 3 years, maybe more of them will think of staying for a longer period. And according to the statistics, many such doctors would leave in 1 or 2 years, and most will have left by the end of 3 years. So how do you consider the merit of extending the registration period from 1 to 3 years? Are you suggesting that because of other conditions and constraints, it's not going to be helpful? Or should we relax other requirements, for example, the intermediate examination qualification or ability to speak English and Cantonese? Why not English or Cantonese? I have a question about the examination. I think it's a logical answer. Local doctors have to pass all these subjects, and overseas doctors should also be required to pass all the subjects, all the same subjects. How many papers are there, first of all? And within how many days they will have to sit all those papers? You have secured additional resources for 2 examinations to be held. If they fail in one paper, would they be able to just do the paper again? Can they pass the different papers in the different examinations? Professor Lau, there are 3 parts in the examination. Part 1 is a multiple choice question. Two papers altogether. 120 questions per paper in Chinese and English. Part 2, English. Medical terms in English. You are not required to take this paper if the medical degree is taught in English, and you have to pass part 1 and part 2 before you can proceed to part 3. If you fail part 1, you have 5 chances to take it. And the part 3, clinical examination, is now called OSCE examination. There are medicine, surgery, ONG, and the pediatrics, 4 parts. The format is different for the different specialties. It's a OSCE or clinical examination. If you pass 2 out of 3, you can carry the pass subject. Surgery.
過咗2樣嘅咧，你咧下次淨係補考。
Medicine, surgery, ONG, and pediatrics. If you pass 2, you can just take the remaining 1. If you fail in 2, you have to retake all 3. So you cannot just pass 1 and try to pass the remaining 2. And which part resulted in most failures? Part 1. They have to take part 1, part 2, and part 3. You must pass part 1, part 2 before you can take part 3. Say the candidate fails in 8 subjects. No, we're talking about the total mark. You won't look at the different subjects or specialties. I have an idea. I don't know whether you can consider doing something else. You think it's fair? You can say it's fair. But, well, if you, after 6 years, ask me what I was taught in year 1, well, it may not be easy for me to pass the examination. Most people fail part 1. Let's say there are 8 categories. There are more than 10. Let's say there are 10 odd categories. I know the professor understands this. Can you not just look at the total marks? I don't know how many parts A, B, C, D, E, F, G you have. You can decide on the passing marks for each category, so that you can allow them to carry forward. It's difficult. say surgery. Surgery is the basis is anatomy, and then applied and pathology or physiology. It's difficult to take things apart like that. If we do this, there will be schools providing training to candidates. If I don't ask questions on a particular subject, then it will not be taught.
If a doctor doesn't learn about the elementary knowledge, then it will be difficult to go back to the fundamentals in the future when something goes wrong. Chairman, I'm not suggesting that the exams can be exempted. I'm suggesting because there's a period of 6 years for medical training, you can have a systematic training. Well, that's not the case for medical training. It's more of a linear training. From fundamental anatomy, pathology, clinical diagnosis, and then it follows a straight line. It is not something sectional, as you suggest. But just like an accountant, there are different papers, and if you can break it up into different papers, then the passing rate would be higher. If you tell me that that's not the case for the two universities, it's a linear approach and it cannot be done, then so be it. I have another suggestion. I just want to create more opportunities for eligible doctors to come to Hong Kong and help address the manpower shortage. Let's take it that the person is a Hong Kong resident who can speak English and Cantonese, but because of insufficient university places in Hong Kong, the student can only get a place in a medical school elsewhere, outside Hong Kong, although in fact the student also has the minimum academic requirement for enrollment in a medical school in Hong Kong. Because of insufficient medical places, the student then further his studies in Australia. Let's say 2 years after studying in Australia during the summer break, the student can then take the exams in the Hong Kong University or the Chinese University of Hong Kong, so that after 6 years of training, in fact, the students will have taken all the exams designed by the Hong Kong U and the CHK. Now, I don't know what you think about this idea. I'm just throwing out for your consideration. We have 6 years of training in the medical schools in Hong Kong. Every year there are exams, but we cannot allow outside students to take exams every year during their 6 years of training as well, and that is why we have the exam in one go. Point of information, Mr. Tam, Section 4A of the ordinance provides very clearly that to take the licentiate exam in Hong Kong, the candidate must have completed medical training in another jurisdiction. So just following the medical registration ordinance's requirement, if you want to take part in any exam in Hong Kong, you need to obtain a qualification and completed medical training in another jurisdiction. I understand this is the arrangement. I'm just throwing out ideas to see whether we can amend the ordinance. If it's not a feasible idea, then let's just shelve it. Not feasible under the current legislation. But if you want to adopt another approach like one adopted in Singapore, then a new legislation will have to be enacted. It cannot be dealt with under the current legislation. My other question relates to HKU and CUHK. By nomination, 2 members from these 2 universities will be appointed to the council. My question is whether these two representatives would be the teaching staff of the relevant disciplines in the two medical schools, or whether they can be anybody as long as there is a nomination. Now, about the two about the two members to be nominated to sit on the medical council, well, I don't know. I'm not in a position to answer. But let me take your question. I am an appointed member, and usually the dean of the medical faculty of the Hong Kong U would try to field candidates to be appointed as members of a member of the medical council. Usually, this candidate would be a more senior and experienced individual, and it's done on a pro bono basis without reward, and is often criticized. So it is not really a popular position. Usually, when there is a vacancy, the dean will try to field candidates, and then there will be discussion until finally the appropriate candidate to his liking is convinced. There will be consultation and discussion, of course, and then the nomination would be submitted to the head of Chinese University of Hong Kong, and subject to his endorsement, the nomination would be submitted to the medical council for the administration to approve the appointment. Mr. Sun, usually we accept all the nominations but although according to the ordinance the appointment is made by the chief executive, the power has been delegated to the Secretary for Food and Health, and over the years we have accepted all the nominations from the universities. My question is whether the person must be holding a teaching position in these two universities. Usually, the ordinance provides that he should be a registered medical practitioner, and the dean of the medical faculty usually would field the candidate who can represent the medical college of the CHK. He will not invite anyone outside. Usually, it will be somebody who is experienced in the faculty. How about a retired professor who is not taking up any teaching post? That's my question, right? Well, if the dean thinks it appropriate, then perhaps, and maybe a retired professor will have more time. Well, I understand your point. You have repeated your questions a number of times. They have answered you. I'd like to give the floor to another member now. Mr. Yip Kin Yun, second round. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to pick up on the point raised and my previous question about minimum safety standard. I heard Professor Lau's reply, but I'm thinking by adopting this expression, I do have some concerns, because for local doctors graduating from these two universities in Hong Kong, would you apply the same description to these local doctors? I'd like to know the meaning of this description, because when you answer my question in relation to paragraph 11A, it says that it is a specialist qualification comparable to the intermediate examination of the constituent colleges of the Hong Kong AM. So it's not the taking of the exam itself, but the qualification comparable to the exam. This is the requirement of the HA, but you'd like to introduce non-local doctors with limited registration to share the workload of frontline doctors. I want to know the nature of work involved, whether it is the same as the work taken up by local doctors graduating from these two universities. If the nature of work is the same, why are the requirements different? Shouldn't the requirement be the same? And if we want to increase the number of doctors in Hong Kong, we can introduce non-local doctors with limited registration. The condition is that they are required to undergo an examination. But for the hospital authority, there is no such requirement. Professor Lau was referring to an examination, but I suppose it's not an examination that this batch of doctors are required to take. I think there's a lot of confusion here. For local doctors graduating from the medical colleges in Hong Kong, basically they would be registered on the general register. For local doctors with general registration, in general they will continue to receive training to become a specialist. We have 12 specialties in Hong Kong, and the requirement is that after graduating from medical college, you continue to receive training and you enter into practice, and then you receive another 6 years of training with 2 exams in between before you're qualified as a specialist. So I think that on this point it was slightly different. For a medical practitioner with general registration, either the practitioner comes from has graduated from the 2 medical colleges in Hong Kong, or a non-local doctor having passed a licentiate exam. But we also have a specialist register. We have about 13,000 doctors in Hong Kong. Half of them also hold specialist registration. So we're talking about 2 levels. One is a general level, and then with further training, and also the HA's requirement is that on top of the further training for doctors, you also need to take the intermediate exam. And the HA's requirement on engaging non-local trained doctors is that they should have a specialist qualification comparable to the intermediate examination, so that because of the high standard, they can start working at the front line right away. Well, for a specialist in anesthetics, etc., they are specialists, and for these specialties, the students cannot start practice without the supervision of a senior doctor, because they only have a general qualification. They need to undergo training for a few years further, and also enter into clinical practice with a supervision, and also to undergo the final exam before the doctor can work independently as a specialist. Well, that's very complicated. I think for non-doctors, we can also understand his explanation. I believe that it's very clear. All right, I have another question. There are 2 exams, and the immediate exam is actually the first one, and there is an outstanding exam. Or I can say that the standard required is not one comparable to the second exam. If you want to be a specialist, after taking the intermediate exam, it will be still some distance away, but that the qualification would not be an obstacle to obtaining the necessary qualification for practicing in Hong Kong. Well, for specialist training, it is progressive. It's sort of like a master and an apprentice. At first, you'll be following a master, and then you'll work under his supervision. After 1 year of practice, you'll be delegated with more tasks, but still with supervision. After a few years, of training, you will begin to get your hands on the certain task independently. But only after passing the final examination will you be qualified as a specialist who can work independently. So for those only obtaining the qualification of intermediate examination, it hasn't reached a standard of an independent specialist. But after passing the intermediate examination, the doctor can then work on his own in certain areas, because right after graduation, the student is still under the supervision of a supervisor. The idea is that if it's still a holding hand approach, the progress will be much slower. For a frontline doctor, you can work on it your own and under the supervision of a senior doctor. I think I can grasp the concept, but I cannot assess the real situation. About doctors obtaining this qualification, I want to know whether the quality of our healthcare system will be affected. It depends on whether we have a good system. For a good system, there should be different tiers of doctors. If you work under the supervision of senior doctor, I think it's all right. This is the established approach, and this also applies to local students. What we suggest is that if we want to engage non-local doctors, the doctors should at least be able to perform some task on their own instead of holding hands from the start. Would the title be or the rank be different from the specialist doctors? Of course, Dr. Zhang. For those meeting our requirement, they would be taking up frontline clinical posts instead of senior posts or consultants. Although they may be working as a team, after 4 years to 6 years, they will still be taking this entry-level post. However, the qualifications and the years of experience may be different. Comparing to a local doctor, he may be more competent in the sense that he has passed the intermediate examination with more working experience, and that is why such doctors are able to help us. Mr. Holden Chow, first round. Please switch on his mic. He's sitting over there. All right, is switched on. I have one comment to make and one question to ask. I thank everybody for explaining things very clearly, and I in particular agree with the suggestion that if we are to engage non-local doctors, the purpose is to help us resolve issues, to start work right away, instead of retraining them after we employ them. I don't think this is what we want, because we're already in great shortage of doctors. We want to find somebody from outside Hong Kong who can start work right away. I therefore agree with paragraph 11 of the paper. There should be a specialist qualification comparable to the intermediate examination and 3 years working experience. I agree with all these requirements. About extending the registration period from 1 year to 3 years for a non-local doctor to come to Hong Kong, the consideration may be the incentive, and that is if the registration period is short, it may be a disincentive, especially for doctors coming to Hong Kong with their family members. He would need to think whether he will settle in Hong Kong in the near future, because if the registration period is too short, it may disincentivize these non-local doctors. And I do have a question on paragraph 15 of the paper about the number of cases approved in different disciplines, and the number of serving doctors. For anesthesiology, number of cases approved is 13, number of serving doctors 6. For family medicine, number of cases approved 7, number of serving doctors 3. Emergency medicine, 5 cases approved, but only 1 serving doctor. My question is, in relation to these 3 disciplines, about the number of cases registered or approved, it seems that the cases doubled the figure of serving doctors.
So, in simple terms, only half of those approved would stay on. From your experience, does this reflect a problem? People apply, they are approved, but after some time, they cannot adapt to the Hong Kong environment, or because of other factors, they did not choose to stay on. Like for A&E, 5 were approved. Now only 1 remains. It's a small figure, but does it mean there is a problem here? Dr. Zhang. First, I'd like to say that since we only permit them to stay for 1 year, we can only attract people who just want to come for a year or so. Those who would like to come and stay longer will not apply. Just like what you said, those who would like to bring their family will not apply. Therefore, those who come will only think that they will stay here for 1 or 2 years. Half of them won't stay for more than 2 years because it's just that they don't have the intention to further their career here. Naturally, these people don't stay in Hong Kong for too long, and 3/4 of them won't work in Hong Kong for 3 years. That is why there is wastage, but it has nothing to do with the nature of work or the Hong Kong environment. Every time we'll ask them, or we say we want to renew your contract, will you say yes? And then they say, no, I like to go back and develop my career. I never think I would stay for Hong Kong for long, they said. Since there is this condition, there is this natural screening effect, and it's very natural for people to leave. A transitional system will only attract people who come for transition. Therefore, it will be a bigger incentive if we lengthen the period to 3 years, and we will be able to attract those who want to stay for longer. Well, even if you extend it to 3 years, there will still be people who would think of coming only for a transition. Well, yes, but then we'll be able to attract more people. Third round, Dr. K.K. Kwok. As Professor Lau is here, I'd like to clarify something with him, because members asked about the examination. Why so many subjects have to be taken at one go? Can I ascertain this from Professor Lau? In places like Canada and the US, where the assessment system is mature, well, I have friends practicing there. They also have to sit examinations which are similar to those in Hong Kong. They would tell us that sometimes the exams there are more difficult than those administered by the HA. In the US, they would ask you to sit exams for the fundamentals of physiology, and they would only have one chance. Can we have that confirmed? Secondly, Dr. Zhang said the HA applies stringent requirements. One of the 3 extra requirements is such that you should reach the level of the intermediate examination. And you also say that you would like to have doctors who have state-of-the-art skills to work at the universities. But then there are also clinical supplementary staff. There are like 10, 20 at the universities. In 2014, in June, there was this case where my old colleague, Mr. Tenka Pugh, received a case about Prince of Wales. In June 2013, an ultrasound examination was done on an aged pregnant woman. And then there was this 30-year-old mainland female doctor doing the ultrasound. And unfortunately, the baby was born and it was affected by multisclerosis, which was congenital. It was quite serious. And PWH proved that this was a female doctor arranged by CUHK who was in Hong Kong for an exchange for half a year. This is very regrettable. Now, I don't want to comment on the personnel of the case. If CU and Hong Kong U adopt standards which are not very stringent, the HA is assuring the standard of clinicians. But if the universities, I'd like to ask the CUHK who is present, how can you make sure that there would not be a recurrence of such medical incidents? Professor, you said you would apply a standard that is different from the HA's. What is your standard? How can you assess that someone has the necessary qualification? You said there is no way to assess the mainland doctors, and it was unfortunate that in this case there was this mainland doctor for exchange in Hong Kong. How can you make sure that this will not recur? Because we understand at the universities there are clinical associates. Very often, while I worked at PWH, and I know that some people who work there have not received all the training, and some of them have not set examinations. This time around, the female doctor from the mainland was not supervised, and she was working alone, and there was this incident. I'd like to know how you can plug the loopholes, and have you done something to address the situation? Professor Lau, I won't comment on the individual case. In overseas countries, there are also licentiate examinations. The passing rate in advanced countries is also usually low. All the subjects have to be taken at one go. I admit that the examination is difficult, but then all the subjects have to be taken. Sometimes some schools want to turn out students who will take this examination. I think it's very difficult to think of ways to improve the licentiate examination. Dr. Kwok, you are experienced. You should know it. As for the two universities, there are two types of people who can get limited registration. Some of them are very experienced. We can forget about that type. And secondly, there are people required or needed by the universities. Some of them have special skills. For example, some people do very good cardiac echoes, and they are required to do research. They will see patients. And then another type who are needed to help teaching. And then universities want their undergrads to have exchange with other universities, meaning they can swap medical students for half a year or a year. Other people will exchange students with you, and I think you are probably talking about those trainees. Well, yes, those who are still under training. Usually, if the system is good, I don't know whether there is a problem here, but usually there should be a senior doctor mentoring these undergrads. the more junior that doctor under training is, there would be more supervision on this person, and he would be making rounds to the wards together as a team. I believe you understand the surgical system. It's a 6-year system. At first, people would be teaching you, and then by the 6th year, you will be able to do something on your own, but you will still be supervised. I don't know what happened in that case. If the system functions well, there should not be too much chance for errors to take place, because after all, there will be a supervising doctor. And it's very difficult to debar any overseas doctors from receiving training in Hong Kong, because if you don't do that, Hong Kong doctors will not be able to have any chance for exchange either. Well, in the mainland system, there are also advantages. They have so many surgical cases, for example. In Hong Kong, we don't have so many surgeries. And there can be complementarity between Hong Kong and the mainland. So to answer your question, how can we prevent a recurrence? It is up to the universities to adopt very strict training protocols. I'm asking this question because you are extending it to 3 years. As you know, Professor, the universities, you are the chairman, and I was on the MC as well, and that they would submit supporting documents to prove that an applicant doctor complies with the requirements of a certain department. Now, of course, these cases are very rare. I wouldn't say they are common, but when you extend it to 3 years, I hope, as you were saying, if they are trainee doctors and exchange students, there should be more guarantee. And it's up to the universities. The power is with the MCHK, but Professor Chan, you represent the CU. When indeed this is to be implemented, can there be more guarantee to reassure the public? This may be a case that is few and far between, but it was in the papers. And the MC and the CU and their assessment systems may be called into question. This doesn't help anyone. There was a legislative councillor receiving the case, and it was brought to the attention of the public. Let me answer the question. If there will be 3 years, there will be flexibility. It is not that everyone who applies will be given 3 years. It's just that we'll have some flexibility. If we get someone good, we hope he will stay for 3 years. And within the 3 years, if he can pass the examination, especially the intermediate one, then with 3 years, he can sit the exit examination already. I think that's a good incentive. And so if it is a good one, we'll give them 3 years. If it's just an average one, then we will give them 1 year. Let us listen to Professor Chan. We will not discuss individual cases. Let me talk about who are senior academics and who can really make contributions. We want to attract them to come here. But as for specialist trainee doctors, of course, there must be a sound system to have them supervised during training. As Professor Lau was saying, perhaps even universities will not grant the trainee doctors 3 years because they are here to receive specialist training. If there is an amendment in the law, will the universities consider increasing supervision? Well, in fact, the supervision is very strong already, but I can't comment on individual cases. Ms. Ellis-Mack, second round. Sorry, Professor. Usually, the swapped students receive training for half a year or a year. Ms. Ellis-Mack, we have 5 minutes. I'll be brief. You said you would not comment on cases, but my understanding is that there are still legal procedures carrying on. We can ask members to consider what Dr. Kwok said. Would that help with the legal procedures? I'd like to ask Dr. Zhang this question. Just now, some members said that this amendment is not just about limited registration. There are other aspects. And, Chairman, I hope you understand that we have spent a few meetings on limited registration. I hope we can go on to other areas of the bill ASAP. Let us not dwell on this issue for too long. I asked Dr. Zhang to clarify again, but it seems some members still don't trust you. Now, can you clarify just once more? Why? Professor Lau said, for example, that you are not going to definitely grant 3 years, even if there is an amendment. Some people say if they are allowed 3 years and then 3 more years, they can easily become permanent residents. Is that the case? Can you not state your objective again, because it seems some members have not heard you? Dr. Zhang? Well, we want to have 3 years mainly because we want to attract more applicants. If they are found to be suitable, if there is approval by MC, they will be able to serve the public. As to the years of service, we can negotiate. And some of them may say they only want to work for 1 year or 2 years, and we will accept it. And if they say they want to stay for 3 years, then we can also accept it. This is mainly to make it more attractive. Now, if now we are only attracting people on transit, so to speak, it is because we have a short period allowed. But this will be a supplementary way for us to attract qualified overseas doctors to serve the Hong Kong public. We are trying to exhaust ways and means to help the Hong Kong public, and we like to take this step. If we can extend it to 3 years, definitely there will be more applicants. That's very clear. Dr. Zhang, can I ask another question? Just now you said there is a shortage of doctors. We can train more local doctors. Can we have a bigger quota of training every year locally? The 2 medical colleges have increased the class size in the last 2 years, but doctor training takes a long time. After graduation, there must be an internship of 1 year, so altogether 7 years. Even if the class size is expanded, there will not be many doctors who will become available in the short period. Next year, the situation will be better. But compared to the total shortage, we will not meet demand anytime soon. But I can say 1 more doctor is 1 more blessing for the public. Dr. Zhang, you're increasing the number of local places, but to tackle the urgent shortage, you are allowing more people to practice in Hong Kong with limited registration. Is there a quicker way to address the shortage? Well, yes, definitely. Because if the bill is passed, next year when we recruit doctors with limited registration, then we'll already be able to introduce more hands into the medical system. Now, I'd like to say that hopefully during the break, we said we would like you to answer Dr. Chen's questions and see you if you can let us see the guideline. We'd like to show it to members. The next meeting will probably be in mid-September. but I must seek members' agreement first, and then we'll fix a date together with the officials. We'd like to thank Dr. Zheng, Professor Lau, and Professor Chan. You have spent a few hours here, and you have allowed me to increase my knowledge about this bill. Definitely, the time is well spent, and we thank you for coming. AOB, there is nothing under AOB, and the meeting is adjourned.